Welcome to the Low Carb MD Podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Hello and welcome to the Low Carb MD Podcast. Today's one of those days. Tro's missing in action. He'll be joining us shortly. He had a little emergency, but we have a hero here, someone who I've looked up for and who's been a huge impact. Anyone who's listened to this podcast knows the impact. Dr. Gary Fedky. It's an honor to have you. And just briefly, I want to say, in San Diego, you were here, and there was such an honor to hear you speak and to be there and to meet Belinda and see you as people and what kind, decent, great people you are. And I was walking down the hallway for people who are listening, and I see Dr. Fettke, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to walk by. I don't want to be a groupie. He goes, hey, Brian, do you have a minute? I was like, wow, he knows who I am. And so we had a great conversation, but about life and what's important and what matters. So Dr. Fettke, I just want to thank you for your leadership. And I know you've helped a lot of people along the way, including myself. And thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor to have you.
Oh, Brian, look, it's fabulous to catch up with you. We're going to expect a complete apology from Tro when he finally turns up. And
yeah, he may be excluded.
It's important we both give him a hard time, all right?
Yeah, that's worth it. Yeah, that's worth it for sure.
I'm very humbled by your words, and so will Belinda, who's not, she's actually still in bed at the moment, and I've got to take her a cup of tea afterwards. But look, we are a low carb community, and we're all on that journey. We're at different points in that, and it's an honor to support those people who are coming on board with it. And catching up at San Diego with yourself, who I did actually know that Brian Lenski's that he was before I got there. So don't underestimate your role in this whole low carb world. It's part of a group of people who are standing up to make a difference in the world, but they're taking their own stories to do it, and then stories of others, and that's the important thing.
Yeah, and your story is one that everyone knows, but maybe just give people who've been under a rock somewhere, who haven't heard, like a brief summary of what you went through and what happened.
I'm an orthopedic surgeon in Tasmania, so a little rock on the southern end of Australia. And for many years, I've been looking after the diabetic foot complications down here. And my journey is, I've got a personal story of my own cancer many years ago, and I was, in retrospect, I had metabolic syndrome and pre-diabetes, and I was overweight, and my blood pressure was too high, and ultimately, I found the role of sugar in that whole situation. It improved my health. I'm much healthier now, 10 years down the track from giving up sugar and carbs than I was back then. You'll understand the concept that despite going low carb, I'm not better looking. I was hoping that would be, improve my looks, but it hasn't done that.
I think you're doing all right. I think
you'll understand the same problem, right?
Yeah.
We're healthier.
We both married up for sure, no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
Lucky on that one.
But my issues which sort of brought me to the forefront, I suppose, very similar to Tim Noakes, is that I became involved in social media, and I started making a noise about the fact that my patients with out of control diabetes, with foot ulcers and requiring amputation, were being served ice cream in hospital. Getting ice cream 3 times a day. And I said, this is crazy. And I was then told, oh, these are the guidelines. And so I started questioning the guidelines, questioning the system, and ended up being targeted by in Australia here, the cereal industry, who were in a paid contractual agreement with the Dietitians Association of Australia to actually silence those voices. So I ended up being the only doctor in Australia targeted for silencing this message of sugar and carbs and cereal being no good for us. And to be fair, at the beginning of this, when I ended up being reported to the medical board for telling my patients to avoid sugar, I actually thought it was a joke. I said, "You're kidding? You're really seriously telling me to stop? I'm in trouble for this." But as it went on, the expert witness, was dragged out by the medical board. It was actually working for the cereal industry at the time. And I ended up being, for want of a better term, charged and then a finding against me for actually saying I'm never allowed to talk about sugar or carbs. And even if it's shown to be best practice in the long term, I was still never allowed to talk about it. So we challenged that finding, and ultimately that took the best part of 4.5, 5 years to actually get my name cleared. And it was all in the same time frame that Tim Noakes was, he was caught up in South Africa. Tim and I became very good friends throughout this whole period of time. And in fact, he was the first person that we rang or had a Skype. And I can remember Tim was having a coffee somewhere and in a cafe, and we had a Skype phone call. And we both, when he got cleared and then I got cleared, it was so critically important for this whole low carb movement that for both of us to get off. As it turned out, Annika Dahlqvist had been in a similar situation in Sweden a few years before. And since then, there's been others who have been caught up. But Annika's, myself and Tim's cases were critical to allowing other practitioners to then speak out about it, because our arguments were based on science. And if it meant giving strength to others, so be it. I mean, I often say that what happens with nutrition inside the body, that's biochemistry. That's science. What happens with nutrition outside the body is opinion, it's biased, it's money, it's politics, it's religious ideology. And that's where Belinda's work came into the whole process. So she was saying to myself, to Tim, to others around the world, Robert Lustig, we've fabulous. We've been connected with a whole lot of people. She said, "You guys are going blue in the face talking about the science. Nobody's listening to you. There's got to be more to it." So as it turned out, that's where her research has led down her paths, because the expert witness for me, who was giving evidence against me, was working for a company called Sanitarium, which is a cereal industry here in Australia, wholly owned by the Adventist Church. And that, in a summary, what Belinda's work has come to realize that there's two enormous influences out there in the influencing the whole nutrition debate. And one is the sugar industry, and the other one is the Adventist Church group, who effectively been writing the dietary guidelines for the US and the world since October of 1917. And everyone goes, who's the Adventist Church? Very simply, they're a religious group, have a vegan orientation, and they effectively own the cereal industry of the world, the soy industry. They started the fake meat industry and heavily involved in the stevia industry. It's just massive. They're the second biggest educator in the world, but they've been writing our dietary guidelines for over 100 years. And then when you realize all this, it's got nothing to do with science. It's got nothing to do with health. It's all about profit. And it's about market share, and it's about conversion of us. Then you combine this. So that's one half of our medical education. The other half is that Coca-Cola and the sugar industry have been heavily influencing our medical education. Throw those two powerhouses together. You've got the sugar industry, the soft drink beverage industry, the cereal industry, the soy industry, the fake meat industry. And when you realize how much they've been influencing our medical education, our nutritional guidelines, then that's behind most of our health issues. So that's about as quick as I can summarize it, Brian.
No, I think that's a great summary. And I think, you lived this and seeing what you went through as a family. And I remember when I first heard this story, I said, there's got to be more to the story. There's no way that they're going to get you for inappropriately reversing diabetes, which is this disease that causes all these complications. And we've all seen it. And you, even in Fat Fiction, that the scene of you dropping the foot, was that in Fat Fiction? No, that was in Fat the documentary, actually.
Fat the documentary.
Yeah, and it's like you hear that sound, and I think for me and Tro, you gave us courage to move forward. We watched, and you could have backed down and just said, "Okay, I'm not going to say anything," and then the movement dies out. But you had the courage to put your career, your family, everything at risk. And, you know, when I first heard Melinda talking, I'm like, this is conspiracy stuff. And I started seeing her data and I think, oh my goodness. Now I wear a tin hat and walk around all day with a tin hat on because, you know, I start realizing there's a lot of bad players out there. And you know, Tro and I have been picked on a little bit also, nothing like what you went through. But I think when we see that and you think, you know, someone who has integrity and for you, the reality, and this is kind of the joke I made, but it's true, is you could have profited on doing amputations all day long for diabetic foot ulcers and made a lot of money doing that. But standing up for what you saw was right. It's like, we can prevent this before it's a problem. That's the same thing Jason Fung is talking about with dialysis patients, right? The number one cause of dialysis, amputation, all these things, non-traumatic amputations, diabetes, blindness, heart disease, all these things. So, you know, seeing what you've done and standing up, that made a huge difference for all of us.
Well, it wasn't, I don't know if it was, I know we did stand up, but it was the right thing to do. I mean, it was completely unconscionable for me to actually back down. I couldn't. You know, I often say, you know, once you see the results of all this, you can't unsee it. I heard you quoted on that, and it was my quote. So I wanted, yeah.
Oh, I stole it from you? I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's fine.
I'll give you credit on that, Doc.
No, but you know, I got reported to the medical board. I was reported 3 times over, you know, just, you know, and each time it was by dietitians who were, you know, directly or indirectly in a paid relationship with the cereal industry. And one of them was because I did reverse someone's diabetes, but it was inappropriate for me to do it on national TV and let people know about it. And so, you know, once you see these things, you can't, I mean, I've got people with out of control diabetic foot ulcers, right? And they're in hospital, and I would write on their prescription, on their medical chart, to have eggs and cheese. You know, so that I was literally forcing the hospital to actually give it to them. And you can actually just see that increased amount of protein and reduction of sugar, their infections start to improve within days. You know, how dangerous is it to actually prescribe eggs and cheese to a patient? But it got to the point I couldn't get the dietitians to do it, so I had to actually put it on the medical chart.
It's incredible. You know, just recently I had a patient, she was admitted for diabetic ketoacidosis as a result of steroid use, right? Prednisone for a skin infection. Ends up with DKA. But she said, look what they gave me in the hospital, like brown sugar, oatmeal, orange juice, toast, and they're giving me insulin drip, and they're giving me, in the other arm, they were giving her D5W. They were giving her sugar water in her veins, and it's kind of insane when we see how people are managed. Orthopedic surgeons, you know, they're there for a diabetic foot ulcer and what they're feeding the people. Mark Cucuzella, who's a friend of the show, Dr. Mark Cucuzella, he's doing a lot in his hospital saying, you're giving soda to people that are there for you, right? You're giving them non-fat stuff, but you're giving them tons of soda and the disaster. And then they get sliding scale insulin on top of that. And we start seeing the insanity of that. And you know, what you've accomplished, and I would love to hear from your orthopedic standpoint. What are you seeing from an orthopedic standpoint with regard to a ketogenic or a low carb diet in your patients?
Look, I'm only seeing benefit. And we'll come back to my disappointment in the medical profession and diabetes, you know, by the end of it, because, you know,
no, the reins are yours, Doc. What do you want to talk about now?
No, it's all on you. You've got me going, all right. So we'll come back to the orthopedics.
All right.
My description of diabetes is that diabetes is an inability. If you've got diabetes, whether it's type 1, type 2, type 3, type 15, as we'll ultimately work out, it's tied up with everything. That's a made up term, okay, type 15, all right? But we'll see that central role of glucose metabolism or dysmetabolism being there in so many conditions as time progresses. So if you've got diabetes, you have an inability of the body to handle the glucose load that it's presented with. That's it. That's an incredibly simplistic approach. But if you don't present the body with excess glucose, then you in fact can reduce, reverse, and put into remission diabetes. And it's this most fundamental situation in medicine. And so it's called the Krebs Cycle. It's how all living creatures, human, animal, actually turn food or nutrition into energy. Krebs cycle, and you can either put in carbohydrate, protein, or healthy fats into it. It comes into acetyl-CoA, and that becomes ATP, and that's our energy. And the fact that the medical profession still believe, or large numbers of them, that we are dependent on ingested carbohydrate, it just astounds me, when there's not a single biochemical pathway in the body that requires us to ingest carbohydrate. So that until the medical profession just get on board with that, then they're just propagating myths. And I'm incredibly, a bit like Tim Noakes has again said, if you're a practitioner and you don't understand that, then you're now negligent. Now they're big words, but I've well and truly moved into the angry phase now. This is just biochemistry 101. We should all understand it. And if we don't understand that, well, tear up your medical degree. Sorry, you're out. But
and there's
I polarize people. I'm sorry, I polarize, but that's it.
No, you're not. You're anyone who knows you knows who you are and your integrity, right? And so, the funny thing is, as medical doctors, internal medicine, family practice, and we look at the surgeon like, what the heck do they know about this stuff? And you're coming back to these guys saying, look, you're doing it wrong. And so they get offended, right? Instead of saying, hey, look, let me teach you and help you. And let's figure this out together. Because the thing I'm seeing is, for me, what I'm doing now is really focusing on metabolic health. So what I see when I talk to my orthopedic surgeons here in San Diego, what they say is like, Brian, look, we've got all these patients. We can't even do surgery on them. They're too unstable to do surgery. They're obese, they're diabetic, their blood pressure's through the roof, their sugars are crazy. So I was like, give them to me for 6 weeks and see what we give you back, right? Decreasing surgical risk, post-op complications, all these kind of things. And I think once we get this and we get the surgeons and the medicine docs who get this together, we can do, and you may have the same thing, as a certain percentage of people end up not getting surgery at all. That was kind of a topic today, actually, on Twitter. People were saying, hey, my shoulder pain went away, my back pain, my knee doesn't hurt anymore, my hip pain's gone. And so, it's perfect timing, because I know we're going to talk about this a little bit, but yeah, that's something we're seeing. Is that what you're seeing in your practice?
Oh, look, you'll know that I started off, one of the paths I traveled down was this whole topic of inflammation. And that I think that our modern diet is highly inflammatory, and it's not one component, it's the components of fructose, which is half of sugar, refined carbohydrates, and the polyunsaturated seed oils. When you put them together, it's the perfect storm. Okay. And I often describe that as the sugar and the carbs are the kindling, and the polyunsaturated oils are the match. And when you put, and so therefore you can actually probably get through life with a whole lot of kindling in your life, and you might be okay. You might get through life with a whole lot of matches in your life with seed oils, but the moment you put the matches and the kindling together, you're in strife, which is the modern standard, American standard Australian diet, and the sad concept. And the half-life of those seed oils is 4 years to get out of the system. It's impossible to go traveling or go out for a meal without getting confronted with a sugar, carbohydrate, and seed oil combination. But when you take out those three things out of your diet, you can reduce that inflammation dramatically. Specifically with orthopedics and musculoskeletal health, and as we spoke about beforehand, there's a textbook of low carb and ketogenic nutrition coming out of the Noakes Foundation. And I'm proudly been asked to write the chapter on musculoskeletal health. So what I'm about to now say, I have to justify with, articles and proof. You can't just sort of say something in a textbook and get away with it, right?
This is how I feel. I feel this. Yeah, exactly.
The trouble is, you might have seen my talk last year. You did in San Diego about the failure of medical education. So I don't trust any research either, because it's all completely biased now at so many levels of the scientific method. So, and I also openly recognize that I've got cognitive dissonance. And I'll come back to that, because whilst I was writing this chapter, I wanted to find a unifying theory of damage. So there was a great article that came out of China earlier this year. So not everything's bad that comes out of China, okay? So, and it was actually looking at insulin and osteoarthritis of the knee. And there's built on other articles, but the long and the short of it is insulin is a highly inflammatory hormone. So insulin is normally secreted by the pancreas in response to the carbohydrate load that we eat. So when we eat glucose, the pancreas secretes insulin to store that excess glucose as fat. It's also a growth hormone, which is where it ties up with cancer. That's in my cancer talks. It's the most prolific growth hormone. So if you've got a high insulin diet, a high carbohydrate diet, which is then you create a high insulin environment, then our rates of cancer go up dramatically. So, but the little known fact about insulin, it's a highly inflammatory hormone. So it's actually a direct stimulant on the inflammatory cells and the synovial sites in osteoarthritis of the knee. But it's also around the rest of the body. But this article was, focusing on the knee. And I know that the article was not written by low carb advocates, because at the end of it, the article said we should be targeting insulin in the management of osteoarthritis of the knee. They completely missed the point that you don't need to target insulin, you just need to reduce the body's production of it. And there are quite a few articles of this. And I think this article brings together a lot of information, because I will see people that with osteoarthritis of the hip or knee, shoulders, hands, and whatever, who go on a low carb diet, go on a ketogenic diet if they go really hardcore, and they lose their pain before they lose weight. There's another project I'm supposed to be doing, but haven't gotten around to finishing or do too much more of it at the moment, called the N=1 study, where I've got hundreds of these stories personally, but I want to collate them into thousands of stories where people lose their pain before they lose weight. And I think the insulin part of that is the critical thing, that's the thing which hasn't been looked at. But that's clearly the biochemistry, or clearly a major portion of the biochemistry.
And I had that with, I had a patient who basically we dropped her A1C 3-month sugar average in our terms from 9.2 to 6.2 in 6 weeks. She lost 18 pounds, normalized her blood pressure, took her off a bunch of meds. And, I said, you're cleared for surgery. Your A1C is good. And then she said, well, my knee doesn't hurt anymore. She was on crutches 6 weeks before that, crying, begging me to clear. I said, it's malpractice. I can't clear you. You're going to have to suffer a little until we get this under control. When I went to send her, she said, well, my knee doesn't hurt anymore. Do I need to get surgery still? Right. She never got surgery. She still hasn't. She's hiking mountains now. And who do I call? Ben Bickman. I go, Ben, you're not going to believe this. He goes, so you should expect that. It's not the weight loss. It's like you're talking about the inflammatory process and insulin, pro-inflammatory, shutting down the chondrocytes and things along those lines. So it's very intriguing how much we're learning anecdotally from this.
I had, and the lady's given me permission to tell a story. She was in her 70s and she came to see me at the end of last year. Her daughter's a paramedic who's low carb keto. And the daughter said to me, give mum both barrels of the shotgun. And so she got the lecture. And I said, she was carb loaded. She was having a bit too much grog, the whole works. But she came in on 2 crutches, arthritic knees, couldn't lift her arms, shoulders, everything, just total body pain. And I said, look, I want you to do this, give it a crack. I'll see you in 3 months' time. Anyway, she came back in 3 months later, just grinning from ear to ear, no crutches, no pain. Now, she had bare bone in her shoulders, bare bone in her knees. I'm absolutely certain if she'd seen any of my colleagues, she would have had at least 1 or 2 joints done in that time frame. And she said she'd lost about 8 kilos, so, 18, 19 pounds. Her blood glucose, diabetes was better. She was off medication. And I said, look, and she's got no pain. And I said, look, but I think you need an operation. She said, no, I don't. I said, look, I need the money, okay. And she said, and then she waved her arm and said, no way, Sonny. And then
yeah, isn't that great? Those stories, it's amazing. It is just amazing what we see and how people can fight to say you guys are crazy for what you're doing. It defies logic because we're treating the patient.
Oh, but they'll still, I have a significant portion of my practice who have done all this, and they still come back with their arthritic joints, and it does catch up with them. This doesn't cure arthritis. It's part of the symptom control. But again, anecdotally, when they then have their surgery, they recover better. I openly believe that they have less pain. And there's some studies related again around pain management with and ketogenic diets. Again, the same role that we see that ketogenic diets have in epilepsy, that decreases neuronal activity. It's a brain stabilizer. And I think it's also a pain stabilizer. There's certainly work being done in that whole pain section as utilizing ketogenic diets in pain management. So it's all there. The other thing which happens with surgery is that the state of fasting, the state of ketosis, actually improves neutrophil function. So they're the white cells. That's that first line of defense in recovery and infection, the neutrophils. And even this was known back in the 1970s, that if you look at what was called phagocytic activity, which is how a neutrophil or a white cell goes along and gets to the site of trouble and then starts eating away at the bacteria and engulfing them, that phagocytic activity is actually increased in the fasting state. And so that continues to actually increase for about 36 hours, even right out to 72 in one small study. So there's an argument for fasting for surgery, but there's a definite argument for not giving people sugar and carbs and ice cream and chocolate and orange juice when they wake up after surgery, because you decrease that phagocytic activity for about 8 hours, literally with a sugar and carb load. So one of the dumb things we do when you wake up after surgery is we give people jelly, ice cream, white sandwiches, orange juice. And it's taken me years, but the patients of mine that come into hospital, they can actually have soup and a bit of cheese after surgery. They're still offered all the other stuff, and it's taken years to be given, because I've got those patients that they don't want to have all that junk, hit the system straight after surgery. Or, the advice to general, if you don't have access to that, take your emergency kit with you to hospital, which might be a snack of some cheese, a bit of, ham, or, nuts if the hospital allow you into it, take some macadamia nuts or almonds and that sort of thing. And literally, I don't know, you probably know, Belinda broke her ankle a few months ago. Not happy, okay, I can tell you that. Yeah. So she now, not happy for a variety of reasons. Like, she's lost her mobility. Now she's dependent on my cooking.
Oh yeah, that's tough. Yeah, it's tough.
And, so I'm a good cook of simple fare, but if you want something extravagant, it's not coming, all right? And so, that was, but we took in, the food supplies to her. Our oldest daughter gave us our second granddaughter, about 4 months ago. And when Kate was in hospital, it was, oh my God, the food here is just abominable. So we had to take the supplies in, and that whole low carb option's not there in hospitals. But you can take it there. And the great stuff about low carb food is it doesn't have to be all refrigerated. There's plenty of snacks you can take. So I think if people are going to have surgery and they are doing low carb, make certain you take a little bit of supply there for you, because you're going to struggle to get it with a standard hospital diet.
Yeah, that's a universal theme. I hear people all the time, they're frustrated, they're low carb, they're doing great, and they go in the hospital and they're on insulin by the time they leave, because they put them on a sliding scale, stop their metformin, and they stop all their other meds, oral meds, because they're afraid of them. So yeah, it's a common thing. And I know a lot of people listening are saying, yeah, that happened to me. So I think there has to be a paradigm shift at some point. And the other point that you bring up, which is not just affecting the joints, is inflammation being a problem, right? Inflammation in dementia, inflammation in depression, anxiety, stress. But acutely COVID, we're seeing that that the people who are dying they have multiple comorbidities, high insulin, insulin resistant state. So hyperinsulinemia, however you want to say the term, but no one in public health is talking about that, which is remarkable.
Well, I mean, that's the elephant in the room. Hyperinsulinemia, metabolic syndrome, diabetes, obesity, mental health, this is multi-trillion-dollar industries. And the ability to improve that overnight is there. And I use the term, we're involved in a sickness industry. It's not a health system. And guidelines have been written by the food and pharmaceutical industry forever. And what we're talking about is actually breaking those guidelines. Guidelines are guidelines. They're not rule books, but they've been made into rule books. And therefore everyone lives in fear of, regulators saying, oh, you're not following the guidelines, you're not following. There's one way out of that really, really simply. And that's called a CGM, continuous glucose monitor. And, those ones where you stick underneath, I mean, I know you know what they're talking about, but for your listeners, it's a continuous glucose monitor. It's not actually finger pricking and testing. In Australia here, it costs about $100 a unit and then $100 for a monitor for 2 weeks. So, that's US 60. But that is incredibly cheap. So my argument is that every person with diabetes or metabolic syndrome or obesity or mental health or whatever should have a CGM inserted. You pop it underneath your skin and you completely 100% individualize your diet to yourself.
You're preaching to the choir here. You're preaching to the choir with our audience. We talk about this. Tro and I are huge believers, and it's amazing what we learn every time patients come back and they're excited because they learn. They don't need me. They can say, "Look what this did," and they know that wasn't good, right? So they can teach themselves, and it's amazing.
And that initial cost of that unit is infinitely less than a lifetime of medication, let alone the complications of all of those conditions. And so you can immediately get around every single guideline, every single recommendation, every single thing written by the pharmaceutical industry, government bureaucracy, by individualizing that patient care. And the CGM does that. It's completely unarguable. People will say, oh, look, I haven't done what the guideline says, but I mean, you've had, I've used CGMs. I can give I've done it with 2 slices of bread or a banana or some cereal. 1 bowl of cereal is enough to push my blood glucose into the diabetes zone. So I'm, arguably, I've been in a low insulin state for several years. So my body's not going to cope with the glucose or carb load when I hit it. But it's really simple. If I was to go and have a bowl of cereal right now, my blood glucose is going to spike through the roof within an hour. So therefore, do I want that? No.
And the point is you're a healthy non-diabetic. My type 1s goes to the roof. You see their sugar tracing. It is unbelievable because they spike
they're yo-yoing. It's a roller coaster. I use that term roller coaster, and we need them to be flatlining. With the diabetes, have you heard me talk about the Maillard reaction?
No, I haven't.
Okay, you know what the Maillard reaction is. Everyone knows it. It's the browning of food.
Oh yes, I've heard that. Yes, yeah.
And, I speak to endocrinologists about it. It's a light bulb moment for them. So when you heat food, and particularly breads, pastries, the glucose combines with the protein and caramelizes and goes brown. That's called the Maillard reaction. And exactly the same situation happens in diabetes. When you eat carbohydrate, your blood glucose spikes. That blood glucose then moves into the tissue, around about 2/3 of it. And that elevated glucose in the tissue then combines with the protein under the effect of body heat. So I say to patients, whenever your blood glucose spikes, it only has to spike once. effectively you are toasting your brain, your eyes, your kidneys, your skin, everything. And it's no different. So every time I walk past a bakery and I see all that brown beige food, I don't want it, because that's actually a visual of exactly what's happening inside my brain. You know, not as quickly, but over 10, 20 years, you are effectively toasting all of those organs. And I find that a very powerful visual for patients, people, doctors to understand. It's that light bulb moment. Oh my God, do I really want that? And so you have a choice. You know, with type 2 diabetes in particular, you have chosen to have type 2 diabetes. That's a very powerful statement again. You have the choice to have type 2, or you have the choice to not have it, purely by what you decide to eat this afternoon or not. So that whole glucose into our tissues is critical. I'll come back to the bone, this musculoskeletal chapter I've just written. I went into it saying, okay, let's look at the biochemistry of what's actually occurring in the damage of cartilage in osteoarthritis. And it's, yes, the insulin is highly inflammatory and it provokes that inflammatory response in the joint. But the byproducts, the material that's found that's actually damaging cartilage are actually advanced glycation end products, and these glycated proteins, which are only there as a result of carbohydrate metabolism. There's disruption of this thing called metalloproteinases, which are actually involved in the integrity of cartilage. But you actually see these glycation products in the actual articular cartilage. So what that means is that our articular cartilage osteoarthritis damage is actually being done by the byproducts of carbohydrate ingestion. I've got a colleague who has a fascination for anthropology. He's been off to Spain and he's been to the biggest collection in the world of prehistoric, or of ancient skeletons. And it's fascinating that before the agricultural revolution, we didn't see osteoarthritis. And skeletons, with the onset of the agricultural revolution, have osteoarthritis. So once we started cropping and graining and having our cereals and increasing carbohydrate ingestion, we actually see the onset of osteoarthritis. There are skeletons before the agricultural revolution that have arthritis in them, but they're generally post-traumatic. So there's been a fracture of the femur or the tibia or the leg or the pelvis, and there's some damage to those joints. But apparently, osteoarthritis is a new thing, which is related to our agricultural revolution. So people, the anthropologists can go, oh, this is pre-agricultural skeleton, this is post-agricultural revolution skeleton. And that all ties in, because when we, and I realize this is again cognitive dissonance, and I'll come back to that because I failed to find a unifying theory. So, but nonetheless, we don't see the byproducts of protein metabolism causing damage in cartilage. We don't see the byproducts of fat metabolism causing damage in articular cartilage. We see the byproducts of carbohydrate ingestion. Very fascinating. When you then look at tendons, it's the same process. It's the same glycation products are associated with tendinosis and low-grade inflammation. They're not tears. It's this, again, these glycation products, which are again related to carbohydrate metabolism. I then started looking at menisci, which are the shock absorbers in the knee. I then looked at the spine and the discs, because lumbar and cervical disc disease is rife in society, and there were not the byproducts of carbohydrate metabolism in either the menisci or the spine. So it seems that our articular cartilage in joints and our tendons are particularly prone to the damage done by carbohydrate ingestion, and that our discs of our spine and the menisci of our knee are not. Would have been nice from a unifying theory to find the same byproducts in all four tissues, but I can't, it's not there. Maybe we haven't looked hard enough at the spine yet. I think the spine is a different issue. It's got a different blood supply. It's got different shearing loads on it. And it's just fascinating. But certainly when I look at patients with metabolic syndrome and osteoarthritis of their joints, they often have their shoulder troubles, they have their tendon issues around their feet. And when you reduce that inflammation, you reduce their carbohydrate load, then a lot of them get better. Are they cured? Well, some are, for whatever that word cure means. Or I like to use the term permanent remission. You know, I've got type 2 diabetes. I was pre-diabetic, but I'm in permanent remission.
Yeah, as long as you stick with what you're doing, right? And you know, the other thing I've noticed along those lines, and we've had a couple of people on the podcast talking about, was debilitating plantar fasciitis. You know, the inflammation on the bottom of the feet, and then they go low carb and it gets better. And maybe the weight loss is part of that, but you know, maybe it's this anti-inflammatory effect of the ketones and the, you know, taking out
it happens before they lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
Or they lose a little bit of weight.
That's
but
true.
Things improve. We just don't know quite the power of low carb keto. I've got an idea. I've definitely got an enormous hunch about it, and so I can't not offer that as an option to my patients beforehand. Doesn't matter if you come along with a sore knee or a shoulder or a foot or diabetes or, as you say, plantar fasciitis or general aches and pains. So here's an option for you. We know that insulin is an inflammatory aspect to it. Why don't you just try this for a few weeks? Particularly those patients with total body pain. I call it TBP. You know those ones that come in, everything sore. And I say, well, you know, you're clearly putting the wrong, you know, fuel in the tank. If you keep putting unleaded in with the diesel, it's not going to work. You know, that whole concept of a little bit in moderation, you know, with a load of nonsense. You know.
Well, and as you raise that total body pain, the other thing that we've seen is people on metformin do better from a fibromyalgia standpoint. Guess what that does? Lowers insulin, makes your body a little bit more insulin sensitive, shuts down the sugar production in the liver. So, you know, things like that, we say, well, dietary wise, what, you know, if you look around, like we have tons of complications from people taking anti-inflammatories all the time, and then they eat a huge pro-inflammatory diet, right? So, well, let's change the diet, then maybe you don't have to get an ulcer in your stomach from all these anti-inflammatories or kidney failure.
Yeah, I'm an orthopedic surgeon, but I have seen patients' renal function improve. Nobody with kidney failure, you know, according to, you know, history, nobody with kidney failure ever gets better.
Yeah, I've seen it recently with improved kidney function on a low carb diet versus high sugar diet. As a matter of fact, this week I had 4 people that their LDL dropped like crazy on a low carb diet while they're losing weight. And I was surprised by that. That's crazy stuff. So we're seeing things like, for sure, we see triglycerides getting improved and all those kind of things. And so it's a big picture. We're seeing a sick population, and our normal laboratories are based on a sick population, which is also the other thing that, in your defense, what I was thinking of this whole time when you were going through all your trial stuff, the food pyramid that they're quoting, it says it's not meant to treat any disease. If you're treating people with major diabetic complications, it doesn't apply to them. It never should have been an issue because it's not meant for those people. It's supposed to be to keep people healthy. And now, you know, we see this study that 88% of us are metabolically sick, that it only applies to 12% of people at this point.
That's right. I mean, it's when you realize how ludicrous our guidelines are. You know, they're a guide to healthy eating for the healthy population. As you say, I walk down the street, I can't find the healthy population that should be eating that way. And if they are, they're going into the takeaway store and having the junk food.
Yeah, and then so there'll be like 4% of the population is for these national guidelines. It's the whole thing is just so. If it wasn't so tragic, it would be funny, right? And then you raised the point. I know you want to go back to this whole thing of sick care, of how our medical societies and our approach to medicine has changed over time.
Well, yeah, that all happened in 1910. So it's all, where we are now is a complete schmozzle. It's a complete mess. You know, we're band-aiding sick care. People are coming in looking for quick answers when they're not there. You know, like, I come in, I'm sick, give me a medication, doctor. And that's the way we've been trained. Or give me an operation. Can't you just fix this? A number of people say, come in, fix it. And I go, no, I can't fix it. You know, I'm a panel beater. I can knock it back into shape, but I'm not a fixer. And so again, I tried to work out how on earth have we all gotten to this situation of following guidelines and stuff. So therefore, it's all in history. And a lot of time, I keep going back to history. Belinda goes back to history. We should all be looking at it. So again, in 1910, there was a thing called a Flexner Report. And it was commissioned by Carnegie of steel and Rockefeller of oil. And it literally came through the US and Canadian medical schools at that time to actually redefine how medical education should be done. And so it very much took out the holistic healthcare model and started becoming the management healthcare model. And with that came the birth of the pharmaceutical industry. And if you followed, if medical schools around the US and Canada, they were heavily supported by the Rockefeller Foundation. If you followed, the new guidelines, you had money that was supporting your medical schools. And all of a sudden, our textbooks were starting to be written by the pharmaceutical industry. And our textbooks of nutrition, as far back in the 1920s, were being written by the cereal industry. So I call that generational education. So you and I were educated with our textbooks being written by Food and Pharma. And our teachers were educated by Food and Pharma, and their teachers were by Food and Pharma. And so this is all about to medicate, to operate, but not to educate. And what we're finding now, and it's incredibly refreshing to actually now be educating our patients, not writing out prescriptions, not operating. You and I are still going to be employed till our retirement, because there's still too many people out there that are still going to need all of our care. But wouldn't it be wonderful to think that there's a future generation that are not going to need nearly as much of this?
Yeah,
if they're raised with the right thing. We look at our grandchildren. Thomas is nearly 3 now, and he's just a little nugget. I can't say that low carb has made him into, obviously I'm a proud grandparent and everything, but he is one healthy, intelligent, coordinated child. I'm not saying that he is that because of low carb keto, even though he's through that pregnancy, and all I can say is it's not doing him any harm. So all my N=1 experiments, that I'm aware of on children, grandchildren, friends' children, people's children who are doing this, these kids are growing up healthy. They're not growing up sick, lethargic, attention deficit disorder. They've got good concentration skills. They're articulate. I'm yet to hear of a child that's doing badly on this. Yeah, it's and so many parents say, "Oh, my child is better behaved." You'll know this with the type 1s. Type 1 grit, that whole group. There's a kid by the name of Ollie. Ollie'd be 16 or 17 now, and he went low carb a few years ago. And I've interviewed Ollie on stage, and we've talked about this. He thought he was a dumb kid at school because his blood glucose was going up and down and up, couldn't concentrate. He was a troublemaker at school. He went low carb. His blood glucose is stabilized. And all of a sudden he said to his mother one day, "Mum, I'm not stupid.
Yeah,
I can think. I understand now." And the teachers at the school said, "Oh my God, what's happened? We've got a new kid in the class." And all that happened is this kid isn't stupid. He's got his whole life together. And I know kids with autism, ADD, have all just stabilized. So that's the generation that's coming.
Yeah, and we're seeing that, and we're seeing our seniors. I just this week I had 3 or 4 people say, "My mental clarity, I thought I was getting demented. Now I can think, and now I'm remembering stuff, and I'm remembering phone numbers again." And it's crazy for me to see that. And the other thing, we had a Zoom call. We do a Zoom call with our patients just to keep in touch with people who are doing low carb and medical weight loss type stuff. And the interesting thing that came up that I never even thought about is this one lady said, "Is everyone else dreaming again? Like, I dream at night. I didn't dream for years. Now I remember my dreams when I get up." And like 5 or 6 people said, "Yeah, me too. I noticed that too." So different things, and maybe they're just getting more sound sleep. Their neurochemistry is better. Their inflammation's better. But, we're seeing that, and that's what's exciting about this. And it's hard, it's hard. And you'll be the perfect person to ask this question. Sometimes Tro and I will get attacked on because we'll make an observation of what we're seeing in our patients. Hey, does anyone else notice this? And there's always the same people who come out and say, well, keto's killing people. It's the worst thing you can do. And I always wonder what their motivation is for being so nasty. Maybe they're just nasty people and they're going to fight with everyone. But I've noticed that being quite a trend.
I think let's put the entire medical profession in that box, okay? If you have to admit that low carb and keto is good, then it completely undermines our entire medical education to date. It's actually having to admit that we were wrong. Nobody likes admitting they were wrong, particularly health professionals. And if in fact the advice you've been giving to people has been causing harm, that hurts a whole nother layer. So people are protecting their turf. There's a general practitioner here in Australia who retired. He was about 70, and he heard me talk in Melbourne some years ago. And the year after, he rang me up and he said, can I come down and visit you in Tasmania? He's got a daughter here. And so John came down and visited, and he said, look, I remember the conversation. I said, come along. We had a chat one evening after work. And he said, I've been a doctor for 40 years, and I realized that I've been harming my patients. I have been giving the wrong advice for 40 years. I'm so sorry. What can I do? And what he now does, he goes around every week around, well, probably not with all the COVID this year, but it was going around rural Victoria, which is southern state in Australia, giving lectures to retirees about how he got it wrong. He admitted that he made a mistake for an entire lifetime. And so I think that's where a lot of the defensive stuff, when people go on the attack, if I tell you you're wrong, you'll immediately say, no, I'm not. And so that one of the great things is, for me, actually, I got all this wrong. I used to be the cake judge at the hospital. I wouldn't take children's plasters off unless they brought me a chocolate cake. It was part of the distraction, so they weren't worried about the sore coming on their arm where we'd cut the plaster off. But for I don't know, 20 years, I wouldn't, I was saying, you've got to bring me a chocolate cake. I was also I was 45 pounds heavier than I am now, but I was the chocolate cake guy, so I got it wrong. And it's incredibly relieving, and you can move forward when you say, I got it wrong, I made a mistake. And the sooner we all accept that, and we go back to the Krebs cycle and the biochemistry and what happens with nutrition inside the body, and we just go back to the science and not the opinion and not the bias and not the guidelines, we all move on. And we as health professionals have to do that first. Because if we do it first, then that gives strength to our colleagues, that gives strength to our patients. And if that's been part of my role in this low carb movement, if you know you're right and you know it's based on biochemistry and you see the results with your own eyes, don't back down ever, because you're being true to yourself and then you're being true to your patients.
And I think that's a big thing we learned with experience. When you start seeing, these new drugs come on, they say this one's curing everything, this is the best drug in the world. Then you find out it's not working for my patient, no matter what your study shows. We have to look at our patient. So that's what Tro did. That's what you did. That's what Professor Noakes did. You look and you say, is this working or not? Because if it's not, we move on to the next thing. And so all of us found success in our different areas of medicine of observing and seeing what happens. That's what a doctor does. We observe and see, is it working or not? If not, low carb's not working, I got to switch to something else at some point, right? So I think that's part of it, is we have to reassess. And, for people of reason, when you see someone like Professor Noakes say, yeah, I told everyone to carb load and I was wrong. Here's the right thing now. And he got ridiculed and picked on because he changed his opinion because he had more data and more experience, right? And the same thing you did. And the fact that you stood up to that and didn't back down, because had you have backed down, I'm pretty confident that this podcast wouldn't happen, right? Things like this, because you gave us courage to say, look, someone else stood up, because I wasn't in a position to stand up and fight for something. I wasn't going to give up my career and everything for this cause necessarily. But then we saw the value because of what you all did in standing up. And that's why we hold you in such high esteem, because you could have easily said, okay, I won't talk about this anymore. I'll just I'll just shut up and do surgeries. You could have easily done that. So that's integrity of saying, okay, look, it's going to cost, and it went through a huge cost. I know I've seen some of the, terrible things. They put stuff in your locker, hanging your cat and just crazy stuff. And you had to go through all that, and knowing you're right and everyone's ridiculing you, that's a tough position to be in.
Many, many years ago, when I think I was about 20, Belinda was 18 or so, I gave her a card, and on the card it said, "It's just you and me versus the rest of the world." And I opened it up, and on the inside it said, "I think we'll need to take them by surprise."
Yeah, prophetic,
and
right?
I had no idea another 30 odd years plus down the track that's what we ended up doing. I encourage everyone to be honest to yourself, honest to your family, and if you've got that structure behind you, then you can go forward. And I know the results of low carb are the first line of management. Well, I mean, it's not even low carb. I mean, I've dared to rewrite the dietary guidelines for the world in one sentence, and I'll give it to you. We need to eat fresh, local, seasonal, whole food based on our environment and cultural beliefs, reducing added sugar and processed food. Full stop. When you break that down, that's completely unarguable.
Yeah.
But if you break that down, I've actually just described low carb, healthy fat.
You got it. Tro missed all the wisdom in the world. Tro, I don't know where Tro's been for the last hour, but he's now popping in with 1 minute left.
He's got his time zone.
I must have got the time incorrect. It's on my schedule for right now.
Welcome.
No, that was last week. Remember, we had to change it because I've got this day job.
Oh my God, I can't believe
he's the one who texted me that. This is good that we get it all live right now, because Tro texted me, goes, make sure it's going to be 1 o'clock your time. We moved it. And he texted me, emailed me, called me to make sure I knew. So Tro, have you been eating carbs lately? You're probably eating your wife's fancy stuff. As a matter of fact, Tro, just as a quick commercial, my wife made pizza with your wife's dough, and it was awesome. I hate to admit it publicly, but it was really good.
I'm glad, man. Don't eat it if you don't need it.
One of our legends here, and Tro shows up 1 hour late. This one is legendary, Tro.
I can't believe it. Listen, I'm sorry, guys. Dr. Fettke, you're one of my personal heroes. I can't believe I'm coming in now.
Tro, how about we do it again?
Yeah, we'll have to do it again, Tro. We barely scratched the surface of everything he's talking about, because we're just using him to get Belinda on, but she broke her ankle out of it. But yeah, it's such a Tro. You missed a great one. This is awesome. I'm so glad you'll get to hear it, Tro. It was good. But Dr. Fettke is, as you know, just amazing stuff and what he's doing, and in orthopedics and just really changing the world. So for young doctors out there, this is the way you do it. You observe your patients. You observe your experience, and you don't let everyone just tell you this is the way it is, because there's tons of experiments out there. When everyone thinks one thing, you just go along with the program because it's easier that way. So this is a life lesson, and just showing what we can do with low carb from multi-modality. So Doc, leave us with a word of wisdom, and also how do people track you down if they want to?
I don't know if there's any words of wisdom, but when you get an email from me at the bottom, I live by this. I live by lots of premises. Well, one is only dead fish swim with the current. That's worthwhile. Yeah. But if on the bottom of my email, you'll see that I write that science evolves by being challenged, not by being followed. And that's the scientific method, and with guidelines that have become rule books, that's become paradigms, which it's almost the end of science if we don't challenge what's actually in front of us. So, if someone says it's black, I'll often say it's white. I might agree with them, but until we actually defend our turf, it should be challenged. So I don't know if that's a word of wisdom, but I'm predominantly on Twitter now, I suppose. Look up Gary Fedky, fructose no. I'm on Instagram. I don't understand Instagram, so I know Sean Bacon understands it.
I'm gonna try to figure it out too. I haven't done it much. I know Tro will teach us.
You'll find Belinda's work, which I find, I'll bang her drum because she's the one that's. Now I talk about the science. She's worked out the vested interests, and she's got a website called isupportgary.com. Bit corny, but it was very important to get help support me and get off all those charges. She's on Facebook, Belinda Fettke, no fructose. She took over that Facebook page in the midst of all the politics. She's on Twitter as well. We've both got our personal pages out there. I've got a website called nofructose.com, completely out of date. Apologise to everyone. Next project, I have to get back on, fill that up again. Our talks are on YouTube. I encourage you to have a look at them because what we're touching on the talks of inflammation. We're talking about nutrition, education, cancer, diabetes. I'm proud of all those talks that Belinda and I have put out there because as a result of that, last year, most people don't know it, I actually ticked everything on my bucket list. So that's actually made, and Belinda did it earlier this year. I looked at her one day, I said, you just ticked everything, didn't you? She went, yes.
Wow.
And so we actually care so much about our health as a community that we no longer care anymore. You can't actually hurt us. You might try. But we've ticked everything on the bucket list. So we'll keep speaking out. And we spoke about this other thing, for the podcast. We will keep speaking out for what's right and proper because it's the right and proper thing to do. And that's, yeah. And so therefore, the system all appears a bit overwhelming, but you also got to know that if you're running keto, you're actually running with a superpower. You're fueling better than the majority of people out there. So.
Yeah, that's why we're not as grumpy, I think, as other people. And I think your word of wisdom is that, saying, hey, look, always assess, always look. And when you're afraid of the counter position, our job is to listen to the counter position and weigh it and say, do they have a point or not? And I think in society in general, we've lost that ability. We want to fight and argue and not saying, teach me why you believe what you believe. Not say you're an idiot, but teach me why you believe that. And let me give you why I believe what I believe. And then we can come to some meeting ground, or one of us gets our opinion changed. But once you already have all the answers, you're never going to learn. I think that's what you're talking about is a huge point.
Well, we talked about that. I went into this research on, tendons, bones and stuff recently, thinking, wouldn't it be amazing if I could, that was my cognitive dissonance trying to almost prove my point. And I openly admit I couldn't, so we've got the same process in tendons and bones, but not in discs and in cartilage, the menisci. It's just fascinating. I don't have all the answers, but I'm still learning, and that we're all still learning.
But you're looking for the answers, not just saying this is what it is and that's it, right? So I think that's the point.
No, there's another computer here I've turned off. Normally I've got two computers, screens, 4 tabs open. Not 4 tabs, 4 search engines open. I like playing jigsaw puzzles. So.
Well, Tro, I'm glad you got to hear 4 minutes of this. What do you think?
Oh
man?
my God, I'm so upset. I gotta talk to my scheduler because I was doing patient care. So you know what, guys, we can give me a little excuse. I'm so upset because literally, I was just talking to somebody who said, Tro, why do you go and talk with debate with Lane Norton? And I wasn't going to do it. And what really pushed me over the edge was when he called you, names. And I was like, you know what, Gary Fedky, he's above this. He's already, had all, dismissed, all the charges that were put up against him were all dismissed, and he was apologized to. He doesn't need to stoop down to these people's level. I was like, but I certainly can. And so not a lot of people know that, but the way that people come after you, it's appalling to me. and the amount of poise you have and the amount of professionalism you have. You know, you're an academic, you're a smart guy, you need to do all that stuff. I don't need to do that. You know, Brian's like always like, Tro, why are you messing with, why are you stooping down to other people's levels? But you know what? I don't mind doing it, you know, and that's what threw me over the edge when he called you names.
Look, Tro, thank you for that. But the important thing is, if we're creating discussion at any level, then that's good, because then the people have got to ascertain what's happening and they take it on board. I actually know that if the cereal and the sugar industry are coming after me, or I can go to a diabetes conference and the pharmaceutical reps know who I am. I'm an orthopedic surgeon, and I hear that the pharmaceutical reps are discussing, oh, Fettke's here. Now that's good, because what we're doing is we're challenging them on their own grounds. And if they're having to justify their positions, that means that we're actually having an effect. So it's good. We've effectively, let's keep discussions going. And those challenges, whether or not they're from scientists or trolls, means, you know, we're having an effect. So that's okay. All I'm saying is, once you know that things are going on, respond to the challenges, but actually take them as a good thing. So if you're upsetting the system, and it tends to be those, you know, big corporates or the big food industry in particular, then maybe we're on the right path.
Yeah, it turns out your most vocal critics have deep ties to industry. You know, so
generally
I find
speaking,
that interesting.
And I think this is Belinda's work. You know, within 5, if you tell me or give me a name of someone or a topic which is up for discussion, which is contrary to what we're talking about, within 5 minutes, that can be tied back to the food or the pharmaceutical industry. And one, you know, this religious ideology, which are all inextricably vertically and horizontally linked. So it's within 5 minutes. It's not even, you know, a day or anything. So Belinda's rung up or contacted every day from around the world by people saying, what do you know about this? And within 5 minutes, she would go, look, here are their ties.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Very, very interesting.
When you tell those things, it's almost like I don't want to know anymore, you know, because it's so scary to me how much of a vested interest a lot of people have. So, and I'll tell you, Troy, you know this too. Dr. Fettke comes in with a quiet monotone and just says, look, here's the facts, here's the way it is, without having to shout over people, without yelling. Belinda Dempson she's like David and Goliath, destroys people with facts, and really, and quietly does it respectfully and says, look, here's the deal. Look into this, right? And so I think, you know, you two as a couple is remarkable. Like, to have her and you together it's just incredible to me when I hear your story, and just wonderful people. I can say that because I know people who know you well, and really it's that these are the type of people we need to surround ourselves with, Tro, and then we'll be on time for stuff.
Well, Brian, thank you. But I think let's finish with where you started, that both you and I are batting about, our wives, we're batting above our average, okay?
Yeah, Tro definitely is. Tro's way above. He's out-punted his coverage, they say. No, we're all very fortunate, right? So yeah, it's definitely truth. So that's why we get to do what we get to do, right? And my wife said, this is what you want to do, go for it, Brian. We'll take a pay cut, we'll deal. We make it happen, like what you went through. That impacted me, just seeing that, saying, man, they're strong people, because to not have a paycheck and to go through that and to get ridiculed, especially when you're right, it makes it even hard. If you're wrong, then it's different. But when you're right and you know you're right, and you have to go through, and people who don't know what they're talking about criticize you. Tro and I live in that world, and it's okay. But, you know, again, Doc, we don't want to keep you. We appreciate you joining us, and you have an open door. We love to, I know there's that other important issue we talked about, and if you want to talk about that publicly, I would love to, anytime. And obviously we want to get the misses on too, and we'll get Tro there on time. I'll call him ahead of time.
Well, I'll openly admit my jealousy right now. If Tro's there on time for Belinda.
Yeah, we're going to see.
I'm never going to be able to live this down.
The big shot is in the family. It might cause some family problems, but that's all right.
Listen, can I tell you, I love your wife's work. I am just like enthralled by it, because people don't understand, the global energy balance network and the, Adventist Church and the all these the True Health Initiative, how all of these kind of play into each other. Eat Lancet. I am just completely enamored by her work. Certainly we love you, but I got to be honest, we really love her.
Well, she's infinitely better looking than me, okay?
My wife too.
But you're definitely on notice now, Tro, that if you're there on time for Belinda, I'm coming, okay?
Got it. Perfect.
All right.
Perfect.
The challenge is set. Hey, everyone, thanks for listening. This is a big deal for us, having Dr. Fettke on. It's been a long time coming, and it's way overdue. And, if you listen to all of our podcast episodes, guess who we talk about a lot? This guy. So thank you for listening. I know we went long because one of us was late, but we're not gonna keep bringing that up. No, Tro, love you, man. But thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. Thank you for getting the word out, and for doing what you can. And we're seeing communities healed, families healed, and this is really important stuff. All the other stuff that we worry about is mostly BS, and there's a lot of good stuff that we can do. So do what you can do, help your neighbors, be kind, and keep listening to us. And we appreciate you. Thank you, Dr. Fettke.
Thanks for taking the baton, guys. Thank you.